Hello, and welcome to this industry guide on the field of genetics. So, what is genetics? According to the Webster College Dictionary, genetics is defined as a branch of biology that deals with the principles and mechanism of heredity and the genetic contribution to similarities and differences amongst related organisms. The father of genetics, Gregor Mendel, studied the patterns of trait inheritance between parents and offspring. Today, the field of genetics has grown to include not only inheritance patterns, but also the structure and function, the variation, and the distribution of genes. Within the field of genetics, there are a few different paths you can take. And in this guide, we'll be discussing two of them, genetic counseling and research geneticists. These two different paths illustrate the broad nature of genetics and how pursuing a career in science does not always mean working in a lab. So, genetic counseling. Genetic counseling is a process of providing support to individuals, couples, and families in understanding and adapting to the implications of heredity to specific health conditions. Within genetic counseling, there are a variety of subfields as well. Some of them being prenatal genetic counseling, which deals with any conditions found within unborn children. There are disease genetic counselors, which helps in supporting families and individuals who have been recently diagnosed with a genetic disorder, sometimes even cancer. So, talking about how this new diagnosis will influence their lives and the potential lives of their future offspring, and perhaps even their siblings or other family members, and if so, how can it be prevented from occurring to other family members, and potential treatments as such. So, who are genetic counselors? Genetic counselors bring together the theoretical knowledge of science, medical genetics, and counseling, and the practical skills of genetic risk assessment and interpersonal communication. Being a genetic counselor is more than just knowing about genetics and the science behind everything. More importantly, if not the most important, is understanding the implications that the science has, the biological implications that the science has. So, what does it mean to have this gene? What does it mean to have these alleles? What does it mean, and what does it mean to the patient? What does it mean to the client? How will they interpret it, and what is most important to them? So these are all extremely important skills for a genetic counselor to have. Some other skills that are really valuable in genetic counseling are obviously a deep and broad knowledge of genetics, understanding genetics, and the biology behind it. And another really important skill is the ability to tailor and communicate complex information in a simple and relevant way for a broad range of audiences. Not everyone coming to see a genetic counselor will have a genetic background, maybe not even a scientific background. So, breaking that down and conveying it in a way that they may be able to understand it better and understand the implications it will have to their day-to-day life, I think is really important. And it comes from having strong interpersonal skills and an emotional awareness, because it's sometimes the news that you're breaking is not always easy, and it's not always good news. So, being able to empathize and convey what you want to say in the best way possible. Another important skill is research skills and self-education. Genetics is a growing field, and research is being undergone every single day, all around the world and around the country. And knowing what new advances are happening within the genetics field is really important and really valuable for you to improve yourself and be and do the best that you possibly can in your role as a genetic counselor. Problem solving, of course, is a huge part of genetic counseling. Understanding why somebody has come to you and why they need a genetic counselor, and what you can do, what tests you can undergo, and how you can possibly help them. is quite a big part of it. So how do you become a genetic counselor? So becoming a genetic counselor in Australia requires a master's degree in genetic counselling, and you need to be certified by the Human Genetic Society of Australasia. There are a few pathways you can undergo in order to become a genetic counselor. The first of which is by an undergraduate degree. So by completing an undergraduate degree and some sort of experience in genetics or counselling, will help you then to be accepted into the masters. So in Australia, there are two universities that offer masters of genetic counselling, and those are the University of Melbourne and the University of Sydney. They're both 2 year masters. Both require a bachelor degree. Melbourne University a lot more specific in the type of bachelor degree you need. You need a science degree with genetics at least at a second year level. Whereas this University of Sydney preferred you to have a science degree with in a field of biology, but aren't really specific. The Melbourne University has a relevant experience in either genetics or counselling, and that could be either voluntary or paid. And whereas University of Sydney just need a aptitude for genetics, which is quite vague, and it could just be included within the bachelor's. If you did a bachelor's that included genetics to some extent, that could demonstrate an aptitude for genetics, or it might be in another way, but it needs to be demonstrated aptitude for genetics. And finally, both require you to undergo an interviewing process with with the faculty. Masters of all of Australia, there are 8 universities, and these universities take 12 students each at every intake. So it is a very, very competitive field to get into. And that's primarily, I think, well, a part of it is that there aren't many jobs available because it is quite a new field, and a lot of people don't really know and understand what genetics really is about and what genetic counselling is really needed, why it's needed in society. So hopefully, as the years go on and as there is a higher need for genetic counsellors, then perhaps this may change. So the second pathway is a career change. So if you are currently or in any of these careers, you need to be working in one of these careers for at least 2 years, and then you are eligible to apply for a master's in genetic counselling, and then go through the interview process, and then hopefully get in. So these are all slightly related, and all of them require a bachelor's degree anyway, so it is somewhat similar to the pathway one, just a less direct approach, I guess. And I think it gives you an opportunity for change. So if you don't get in to the masters straight after high school, you can pursue another career and then maybe try again later on in your career. So what does the salary look like for a genetic counsellor? Well, this is based on the Victorian public sector, so within public hospitals. So a graduate was looking at around $55,000 a year. This obviously subject to change, based on merit and, I guess, place of occupation. And then there is a senior genetic counselor is looking around $121,000. But yeah, as I said, this is based on the Victorian public sector, so it might be different in other countries, other states, and the private sector may differ slightly. So, what do the future prospects look like? As I mentioned, genetic counseling is a very new field. Genetics itself is a new field, and genetic counseling is even newer. It's so we don't have much information on how it's going to go and how it's going to progress, and what it has looked like. We don't have enough data, but as of 2014, in the US, there were under 2,500 genetic counselors employed, and registered within the US. And the US is one of the, leading countries in terms of genetics and genetic counseling and genetic research. So you can imagine how little genetic counseling we have here in Australia, and how little information we can gather from that. But as the field of genetics grows, the prospects for this role will grow as well, and in a few years' time, it may go to be more than what it is today. And so it is a growing field. It's hard to say exactly how much it will grow or how little it will grow, but experts in this field are fairly positive and optimistic that um, there will be a great demand for genetic counselors in the future as we become more aware of genetics, and as a society um, understand the implications of getting your genome scanned and analyzed. So research geneticist is the next career we'll be looking at, and a research geneticist is they study the inherited characteristics of and traits of animals, humans, and plants. Their work contributes to understanding of and treatments of disease, the knowledge of human behavior, the development of crops, and many other fields. Being a research geneticist is really a very, very, very broad, and you can narrow it down to whatever interests you the most. Some of the specializations of a research geneticist are a biochemical geneticist who deal with kind of like the mechanisms of genetics. Another field is cytogenetics, molecular genetics, um, evolutionary genetics. So there are quite a few options. And whether you are more into plants or animals, it's really there's a lot of room to kind of like wiggle around. So research geneticists are scientists that have specialized in the field of genetics, and research geneticists sometimes specialize further into subfields, some of which I've spoken about just now. Okay, so what are some of the skills required to become a research geneticist? Well, one of the most important skills would be the ability to analyze and understand data and documents. So the data, of course, will come from experiments and as a result of the experiments that you carry out, but the documents as well is very important to kind of like understand where we are now, where the world is at in terms of genetics and the field and the subfield you have chosen to specialize in. So reading journals, reading articles, reading about past experiments that might be related to what you're doing, current work that's going on around the world, current research around the world, is really important to help you grow as an individual and progress, but also to apply more context to what you're doing and help you progress and not just repeat what somebody else has done. Identifying, evaluating, and solving complex problems, because problem solving is one of the most important aspects of um, research, and having a broad knowledge of genetics is important, whether you're specialized or not. I think understanding the field in overall is quite important, and understanding the implications of new information. So whether that be from your own research or from your own experiments or from research you've done from other experiments, it's really important to kind of understand where this fits in and how it fits in and how it changes. Maybe it might change your hypothesis or the experiments you want to carry out or the angles that you want to take with your experiments. So how do you become a research geneticist? So the qualifications vary depending on where you want to specialize, but the minimum needed is a bachelor degree in science. So there are different kind of levels, so to speak, of becoming a scientist and a geneticist. And within the field of science and a scientist to progress, you need more education. So a lab assistant is considered an entry-level job, and that can be with a bachelor degree in science. The honours will definitely increase your chances of getting a job. A senior level researcher will will need a master's, and then the head researcher is a PhD. So, um, you know, education is, and further education is how you're progressing in genetics and in science in general, to be honest. So what does the salary look like? So an entry level, again, this is for the um, Victorian public sector. So this may be low or high depending on where you want to work, and where you work. You know, universities might pay more. So this is an estimate. So graduates look at around $40,000, whereas a senior head scientist is looking at about $135,000. In terms of future prospects, so on average, around 60% of graduates will get full-time employment. So on this graph, this number has been translated into a scale system, so it may be better compared to other occupations. So compared to other occupations, the employment level is about a 5 out of 10 in this field. There is a 73% of full-time employment, so the other 27% are part-time or casuals. Full-time earnings before tax are $1,500 per week, which is pretty high up on the scale. The unemployment rate is below average. In the past 10 years, there has been a growth of 95%. Within the last 5 years, a growth of 51%, and within the last 2 years, 120%. These are all quite high numbers, but unfortunately, the future does not look good for research geneticists. The future growth is considered moderate, and future job openings is categorized as below average. A few of the reasons why this may be is, one, there's a change in the grant scheme, and second, government budget cuts. So the change in the grant scheme is that the government or funding organizations won't be giving out long-term grant schemes. So every year, labs will have to reapply for grants, which is not the best situation for labs to be in, to ask at the end of every year whether they'll be in employment and be able to continue their work for the next year. The second reason is government budget cuts. Now, in 2014-2015 financial year, science and research spending was seen to be the equal lowest since records started in 1978 to 1979. The Australian Research Council grant funding in 2015-2016 has been reduced by $86 million from 2014 to 2015, and the funding for medical research in 2014-2015 is now estimated to be $74 million less than it was expected, and a further $10 million will be cut in 2015 and 2016. So these are not numbers that don't look great for the science field, and the government is trying to introduce a new funding scheme. However, even with that added funding, it's still not going to be at the level that it was a couple of years ago. So, not very optimistic for scientists and labs out there, but it is still a growing field, and you know, things may change. Medical breakthroughs sometimes cause more jobs and loss in jobs. So, it is something that can change and is not set in stone. So that was the field of genetics. I hope you learned something and are interested to kind of pursue a career in genetics. And genetics has led to a lot of medical advances in the past few years, and I believe that this field is only going to grow and blossom and get better. So though it's a bit grey and murky and not very set in stone and solid at the moment, I think things are only to get better in this field as we grow and catch up to the world leaders in genetics. So, thank you so much, and all the best.